Okay, so we're still doing Unit 5.1. We're still looking at development and disparities. But what we're really looking at for this lesson and the next one is how to measure development and evaluating these measurements of development. So today we're going to look at the Human Development Index. All right, some of you will have heard of this and gone through it in IGCSE. This is what we call a composite indicator. So similar to the COF index, and we've already gone through that, it combines a range of different categories, okay? So we get a number when we mix these different categories together, all right, instead of using a single indicator. So we've got 4 things on the screen here. We could take these individually and use these, and we could use these as single indicators, but they only sort of reflect one area. So traditionally we would have used GDP per capita, or GNP per capita, okay, but that would have only given us an indicator of wealth of a country. And there's still limitations with that, all right? But now what we've done here with the Human Development Index is we've got health also reflected. So we've got life expectancy. We've also got education reflected as well. So we've got mean years and expected years of schooling, right? So if I'm evaluating this, it is much better than a single indicator. So what I do is I put the numbers together and I get 0 to 1. The closer to 1, the greater the level of human development. Okay, so this is a composite indicator, right? You can see some examples here of numbers, all right, in red, and the blue numbers are the ranks. So if I just look at low-income countries here, generally, I will see there is going to be a correlation between wealth, all right, and obviously levels of human development. Afghanistan here ranks very, very lowly, all right, so a HDI of 0.496. With COVID, we could also argue that maybe some of these countries might fall over a period of time. So if I look at Afghanistan and I go back and I look at some of the criteria, mean years of schooling and expected years of schooling could have been one of the things that's really had an impact on Afghanistan, especially with the fear of girls going to school with the Taliban in the country, for example. All right, so I can see also some of these countries here, maybe the fertility rate and the birth rate is quite high. Living in rural areas, we can't afford to send all of our children, in particular girls, so some of it's linked to culture, to school. So the mean and expected years of schooling might be a lot lower. If I move over here and I look at my top 5, most of them are high-income countries. Generally, European nations will have a high Human Development Index. All right, so I can see here, top and my bottom. All right, so again, quite clearly here, a lot of investment in health, education, and obviously we do quite well in terms of our GNI per capita. All right. We've already talked about Afghanistan, so unfortunately if I do have a look in rural communities, I look at culture, I look traditionally that mean years of schooling, in particular for girls, is quite low, and expected years of schooling as well. So this is quite good because it gets us looking at different components of the HDI, and we can decide where we need to invest if we choose to invest here, all right? And these also connect to the relevant sustainable development goals here. So life expectancy at birth, that links up to SDG 3, and these 2 here, education, link up to 4. And as we spoke previously, they are all interconnected here. All right. So what I can do is I can just go along here and I can look at countries and I can see, oh, yeah, mean years of schooling is quite high in Switzerland, but Switzerland, for example, might not have a higher life expectancy or GNI per capita. So I might want to invest in one of those areas here, but their life expectancy is relatively high. Okay, so I can have a look down the list and go, oh, okay, why is that country not doing so well there? Might be doing well in one area here. Okay, if I do have a look, I can also, one of the positives here, I can see how ranks change over time. These are my lowest ranked nations in 2019, most of them sub-Saharan Africa, right? A few of them corruption, civil war, political instability that might drive kids out of school, for example. All right, so a range of different things. I might see poverty increasing in these areas here. So 3 of these 4 countries here, what you're seeing is a decline in their rank as well. All right. Okay, I can look at it here. I can look at the global distribution on a map of countries that have a high HDI. So I can see North America, Western Europe, Australasia, and parts of Asia as well. So I've got Japan there and South Korea. Okay. I can see that there is a positive correlation between HDI and GDP per capita. All right, so there will always be some anomalies here, but generally there is a positive correlation here. All right, what I suggest you do is just pause this, read through page 572, make some notes on countries with high and low HDIs and how they might change over time, or you can look this up as well. But I would make some notes on contrasting countries of your choice and see if there's any anomalies as well. Look at the composition in particular, because I think that's really important as well. All right, so prior to the HDI, GNI per capita was the most common indicator, but as I said, there are limitations to this, and that only really reflects economics and the economic development of a country. Okay, so it doesn't include health and education, which is represented in our composite indicator here. So what we want to look at now is how valid and reliable our indicators are. All right, it's the same thing we did the COF index. So we'll look at some of the positives of the Human Development Index and some of the limitations as well of this. Okay, so if I look at the advantages, I can say, well, it takes into account more than economics, which is what we were using previously. It can track a country over time, and that's both improvements, and as you saw with 3 of the 4 bottom ones, they had negative changes over a period of time. All right, so it can also show us areas that we need to invest in. So do I need to invest further in health? Do I need to invest further in education as well? All right, so 3 positives here. More than economics, I can track and compare changes over the time, especially my subcategories here. All right, so I've got 3 categories: health, education, and wealth. What do I need to invest in over a period of time? Okay, so it allows comparisons between regions. I could do this by a state in a country, all right, or I could do this in different parts of the world. It allows temporal, which means changes over time, not just since the 1990s, but one thing that's going to be really interesting is post-COVID. So how do these countries come out in 2021, all right? So as I said previously, I can look at individual components as well and analyze these. Some of the limitations, there's no environmental factors. Now, obviously these are subjective, but there's a lot of subjective or qualitative factors that are arguably missing when I look at human development. All right, so for example, China, Beijing, high levels of air pollution, that I guess you could argue is indirectly linked to people's health, but it's not there. All right, if I look at data, some of the data that is gathered in low-income countries could be either outdated, unreliable, incomplete, in particular if I'm looking at wealth. And we've talked about that earlier in the course. There are a lot of things that are not included, such as the black market, the subsistence farming, right? The qualitative indicators are missing, so things like freedom of speech, human rights, gender inequalities, corruption in a country. So there are a range of limitations here, all right? Some of these are subjective, right? Some you could say are environmental. Some of them you could look at in terms of what you might perceive as human rights, okay? It doesn't show differences in a country, all right? Some states might have a higher HDI, for example, all right? Things like the feeling of security, how do I quantify that? That's quite difficult, all right? As I mentioned previously, looking at air pollution, things like water pollution, what about nature and our ecosystems? They really are important to our long-term development, but they're not there as well, all right? What I might also see is, if I look at patterns, many of my oil-rich nations, they might have a high GNI per capita. It might be a lot higher than their HDI rank, so I do suggest that you go back and have a look at some of the data. Some poor nations like Cuba have a higher HDI than their GNI per capita rank, and that's because they invest heavily in health, for example, all right? So a lot of these scarce resources go into health and education, but particularly health if I'm talking about Cuba, but then I might look at health and education if I'm mentioning Vietnam as well, all right? So as I said, Cuba is a country that invests heavily in their healthcare system. They may have a very low GNI per capita. So I do have some anomalies here. Now, what I suggest you do is go through again and have a look at some of the countries that are at the top, the bottom, and make sure you can define what the HDI is, why it's important, limitations, because it's evaluation, all right, and point form a skeleton or a scaffold for this 12-mark question here.